Neos is an archetype of cards, the principal one being Elemental Hero Neos, created and used by Jane Yuki in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. Jane's contest-winning card designs Neos and the Neospatians, along with Yubel, was sent into space by Kyber Corp in the hope they would be imbued with space waves. It was hoped that doing would temper the malignant spirit of Yubel. The experiment was a success and the spirit world of Neospace was created. Elemental Hero Neos worked with the Neospatians to summon powerful Neos fusion monsters through contact fusion. Most Neos fusion monsters have an improved version of the effect of its corresponding Neospatian fusion material. The archetype doesn't rely on contact fusion, however, and has 5 traditional fusion monsters in the names of Elemental Hero Brave Neos, Elemental Hero Divine Neos, Elemental Hero Neos Knight, Elemental Hero Neos Kluger, and Rainbow Neos. In the TCG, due to several Neos cards including Neospace in their TCG name, instead, and Neospace cards exclusively being Neos cards, Neospace is considered a separate archetype from Neos, but is supported by all cards that support Neos cards that could affect Neospace cards, such as Elemental Hero Divine Neos. Despite being unrelated to Elemental Hero Neos, Darkness Neosphere is part of this archetype, due to having Neos in its name. A typical strategy with this deck around keeping your Neos fusions on the field as long as possible by circumventing their effect that forces them to return to the extra deck during the end phase. There are a number of ways to do this. Using the field spell, Neospace increases the attack of Neos and his fusions by 500 and prevents them from returning. It should be noted that returning is still possible if you wish to clear your extra monster zone or activate an effect of the triple contact fusions when they return. The equipped spell Instant Neospace serves a similar role to Neospace in that it keeps your fusion out on the field, but without the attack buff. You get the additional effect of floating a Neos back out to the field when the equipped monster leaves the field. Neos Fusion allows you to quickly special summon a Neos Fusion monster at the cost of not being able to special summon for the rest of the turn. The second effect of this card lets you banish it to prevent battle or effect destruction of your fusions and prevents the activation of its effect to return itself to the extra deck. Contact Out is a quick play spell that allows you to return the Neos fusions and special summon the fusion material monsters from the deck. Whilst this obviously isn't preventing the monster returning, you can easily resummon it during your main phase too. Note that this only works on monsters with specific material listed in the card text. Whilst you can return fusions like Brave Neos and Cosmos Neos, you won't be able to special summon the materials. A less orthodox strategy is to negate the effect of your fusion using its own effect. The best examples of this are Elemental Hero Nebula Neos and Elemental Hero Dark Neos. This leaves you with a 3500 to 2500 vanilla beatstick, but be careful as this can backfire easily. GB Hunter can prevent the final effect of the Neos fusion monsters from applying, but will stop further contact fusions, although this can be circumvented with Neos Fusion. Special Neos Fusion monsters from your extra deck using Favorite Contact by putting Neos and other materials from the hand, field, graveyard, banish zone on the bottom of your deck, as this card prevents your fusion monster summoned by this card's effect to be returned to the extra deck if you return Neos into the deck. Armed Neos is a Wind Attribute Warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 10 with 3500 attack and 3000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and an Armed Dragon monster, and it must be fusion summoned. If this card is special summoned, you can choose one dragon monster in your graveyard and destroy all monsters your opponent controls with an equal or lower level than it. When this card destroys a monster by battle, you can make this card gain the following effect. During the main phase, as a quick effect, you can tribute this card, special summon one Elemental Hero Fusion monster from your extra deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. This card is a combination of the Armed Dragon and Elemental Hero Neos, two of the main protagonist monsters, and it's just a way of kind of shoehorning the two cards together. It's decent for a level 10 monster with 3500 attack and 3000 defense points, and won't be able to be beaten over that easily. It must be fusion summoned, but when this card is special, you can just choose a dragon monster in your graveyard and destroy all monsters your opponent controls with equal or lower levels than it. It's not really relevant on the Elemental Hero Neos side of the deck, unless you are wanting other armed dragon monsters or other dragon monsters in order for this card to kind of apply. And simply by when this card destroys a monster by battle, this is where it does have the elemental hero type of effect and supports it, in that you can just tribute this card to special summon any elemental hero fusion monster from the extra deck, ignoring the summoning conditions. This means you can go for practically anything, as long as it's got elemental hero in its name and it's a fusion monster, without having to meet any additional costs or concerns. Darkness Neosphere is a dark attribute fiend type level 10 with 4000 attack and defense. This card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card cannot be special summoned except by one fiend type monster you control and the one fiend type monster from your hand to the graveyard. When your opponent's monster declares an attack, this card cannot be destroyed by battle. Once per turn, you can return all face-up trap cards you control to the hand. Whilst this isn't directly linked to Neos as an archetype, even within its effect, it's very much reliant on fiends, and the deck doesn't run fiends. The evil heroes run fiends, but that doesn't kind of connect the decks together. This, just by naming, has Neos in its name with the Neosphere, means it's technically treated as a Neos card. It has 4000 attack and defense. It's actually quite usable, but it does require you to send a fiend monster, both one that you control and one that's already in your hand, to the graveyard, and your opponent has to declare an attack for you to then special this monster. So there's quite a lot to do before this card can come out. It is protected from being destroyed by battle, which isn't much of a concern as it does have 4000 attack and defense. Very few monsters are going to instantly be able to get over this card. And once each turn, just by returning, you can return all face-up trap cards you control to the hand. I don't necessarily understand the purpose of this outside of if your particular trap card has search or effect upon activation, it could be a way of resurfacing that effect. But it does require you to then set that trap card again to then activate it at another point. And your opponent is going to know what you're doing and they're going to try and negate this type of ability. Elemental Hero Aeneas is a wind attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Neospatian Hummingbird to summon. This card can only be special summoned from your extra deck by returning the above cards you control to the deck. You do not use polarization. While your life points are lower than your opponent's, this card gains attack equal to the difference. This card returns to the extra deck during the end phase. The interesting thing about this card is I think there was a dispute with the card artwork owner, and therefore Konami has never been able to reprint this series of cards, making it extremely valuable as it has only ever come out of its original set, and therefore until that agreement has come into place and actually has been done about it, you will not be seeing new forms of this card on the market. It means that you're not going to get any sort of upgrades to the deck in terms of Air Neos. Although saying that, we did get a Storming Neos, which is a combination of the Aquadolphin and the Hummingbird. The summoning condition on this card isn't too difficult, as getting Elemental Hero Neos out onto the field, there are so many ways of doing it, including spell cards. I mean, even Fake Hero is an example of a card that instantly just brings that from your hand straight onto the field. It does go back to the hand at the end of your turn, but if you use it to contact fuse into this card, then that effect is really just negated. Neospatian Air Hummingbird is an interesting one in terms of this card's effect, because this card gains attack points equal to the difference in life points you have with your opponent, but your life points have to be lower than your opponent's, whereas Hummingbird's ability has you gain life points 500 times the number of cards that your opponent has in their hand. Each effect works really against each other. I would have preferred this effect to have been one where this card gains attack points equal just the difference in your life points. That would have made more sense, because otherwise its material can't even really use its effect. It does return it to the extra deck during the end phase, but that's similar to most of the fusion monsters that are Neos-based, and there are a few cards that can actually mitigate that negative side of the effect. Elemental Hero Aqua Neos is a water attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Neospatian Aqua Dolphin. Must be special from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. Once per turn, you can discard one card, destroy one random card in your hand. and once per turn during the end phase, return this card to the extra deck. This takes the effect of the original Aquadolphin and it kind of makes it less specific. With Aquadolphin, its effect is reliant on you having a monster with higher attack points than any other monsters that your opponent has in their hand, and then it wipes one of those cards out and inflicts 500 points of damage to the opponent. This just gets rid of a card from your opponent's hand, making it more difficult for them to recover those cards. It does come at a discard cost, which is the disadvantage to the deck, because you're kind of having to use a 1-for-1 effect, and this card has to have other ways of protecting itself, otherwise it will, like a lot of the other fusion Neos monsters, return itself back to the extra deck at the end phase of your turn. Elemental Hero Brave Neos is a light attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and 1 level 4 or lower effect monster. It must be fusion summoned, and it gains 100 attack for each Neospatian and hero monster in your graveyard. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can add 1 spell trap card from your deck to your hand that mentions Elemental Hero Neos. On this card is pretty easy, as you can actually bring it out from multiple different ways. Even just using polymerization, it can come out. It requires Elemental Hero Neos, which is typically fine, and any level 4 or lower effect monster. There's so many of those cards, pretty easy to use that effect. As this card is on the field, it gains 100 attack for each Neospatian and hero monster in your graveyard. That's any of the heroes. It can be Vision Hero, Masked Hero, Evil Hero, Destiny Hero, or Elemental Hero, as well as the Neospatians. The more of those cards you have in the graveyard, the more powerful this card becomes. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you're just able to add a spell or trap card from the deck to the hand that mentions Elemental Hero Neos. Whichever ones you can target are the ones you can really go for. Depending on your situation, there are so many different Neos spell and traps. They'll be that's suitable for the time and your situation. Elemental Hero Chaos Neos is a dark attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 9 with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Neospatian Dark Panther and a Neospatian Glomos. It must first be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. Once per turn during the end phase, shuffle this card into the extra deck, and if you do, set all face-up monsters on the field. Once per turn during your main phase, you can toss a coin 3 times. 3 heads destroy all monsters your opponent controls. 2 heads for the rest of this turn. The effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls are negated, or 1 head return all monsters you control to the hand. This card is one of those various kind of higher upgrade versions of the Elemental Hero fusion monsters, in that it requires not only the Elemental Hero Neos, but 2 of the Neospatian monsters, Dark Panther and Glomos. Both of those cards are okay, but it's quite difficult to keep those cards out onto the field and quite tricky for them to remain there. The summoning on this card requires all 3 of those cards to be shuffled from the field back into the deck. You can reset those cards, but it has a cost of 3 cards. And during your end phase, just by shuffling this card into the deck, extra deck, you can set all face-up monsters on the field. You can just Book of Moon everything you and your opponent has. Once per turn during your main phase, depending on the number of heads you get, this is very luck dependent, unless you are planning on running all of these kind of coin tossing types of cards, such as the double coin toss types of effects. It is very much a gamble to use the effects. If you get the 3 heads, congratulations, that's a massive effect. It wipes out all of your opponent's monsters they control. Very good. Second ability, just the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls are negated. Very useful as a way of, well, this is very much how the card likes to work in being able to shut down your opponent's types of effects. The 1 heads is unfortunately the worst type of effect, as it returns all monsters you control to the hand. This means you lose all of your cards, and therefore it becomes much more difficult to sustain yourself within the duel, especially since you've just used all your just to bring this card out. It's not advisable to use unless you can kind of guarantee the effect, or you have alternative options whereas if this card fails to use the effect you desire, you have backup options. Elemental Hero Cosmos Neos is a light attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level with 3,500 attack and 3,000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos plus 3 Neospatial monsters with different attributes. It must first be special summoned from your X deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. You do not use polymerization. If this card is special summoned from the X deck, you can activate this effect. For the rest of this turn, your opponent cannot activate cards. The cards your opponent controls cannot activate their effects. Your opponent cannot activate effects or cards in response to this effect's activation. And once per turn, during the end phase, shuffle this card into the extra deck, and if you do, destroy all cards your opponent controls. This is one of the highest upgrades to all of the Elemental Hero Neos fusion monsters, in that it requires probably the most to go into, but there are for that. It's a level 11 monster. It has 3,500 attack points, which justifies it in and of itself. It needs an Elemental Hero Neos, but it requires 3 Neospatial monsters with different attributes. I think there is one Neospatial for each of the attributes. It's not too fussy. So long as you've got those cards, it's fine to bring out. I would say, at least because it doesn't need named ones, it's much more generic than the other fusion monsters that often need 2 of those. When this card is special summoned, it has to be through contact fusion. You do not use polymerization, you just shuffle those cards back into the deck. You are having to use 4 cards to just bring this card out. Once this card is special from the extra deck, you can activate this effect. Your opponent cannot activate any cards. It shuts down your opponent's ability to really do anything. Cards your opponent controls cannot activate their effects. This just completely shuts down any of their responses. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this effect's activation, and since this can really be responded at any point, this stops your opponent from doing anything. This is fantastic. There are a couple of other cards. There is a Red Dragon kind of synchro monster that has that same kind of ability that was recently banned in the latest kind of TCG ban list, but I don't see this card being the same. And once per turn during the end phase, just by shuffling this card into the extra deck, you can wipe out all of your opponent's cards they control. If they have a lot of cards that they've invested into, it's a good way of preventing your opponent from accessing those cards quite as easily as they could. This card is worth noting that there are other cards that support the summoning on these cards to bring it out without having to use as many as you think you need to. Elemental Hero Dark Neos is a dark attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's level 7 with 2,500 attack and 2,000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Neospatial Dark Panther. It must first be special summoned from your deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. You can target one face-up effect monster on the field, negate its effects. While you control this face-up card, you can only target one monster at a time with this effect. Once per turn during the end phase, return this card to the extra deck. This is the original version of the Dark Panther fusion monster that they've got. This just needs Neos and the Neospatial Dark Panther. Pretty simple to get those cards out and those cards to the deck, as that's a contact fusion. You're able to target any face-up effect monster on the field, and it gets to shut down that card's effects. It can only target one monster at a time with this effect. You can, if this card keeps being kept on the field, potentially you can do this on other turns as well. But during the end phase, it does return to the extra deck unless you have like Neo Space Out, which can help to negate those types of abilities. Elemental Hero Divine Neos is a light attribute warrior type fusion. It's level 12 with 2,500 attack and 2,500 defense. It must be fusioned using any 5 Neos, Neospace, Neospatial, or Hero monsters, including at least one Neos or Neospace monster, Neospace, and one Hero monster, and it cannot be special summoned by other ways. Once per turn, you can banish one Neos, Neospace, Neospatial, or Hero monster from your graveyard. This card gains 500 attack, and until the end phase, it gains the banished monster's effect. This is kind of an all-inclusive type of card. It's meant to pretty much merge all of the different aspects of Jane's deck together. It must be fusioned using 5 materials. That's an extremely extensive cost, but there are cards that mitigate this, including at least one Neos or Neospace monster, a Neospatian monster, and a hero monster. So you can use multiple of them, as you can get at least one of each of the others. And it cannot be special summoned by other ways. It is restrictive to itself. You're able to just banish a Neos, a Neospace, a Neospatian, or a hero monster. This card becomes a 3000 attack monster for the rest of the turn, and you just copy that banished monster's effects depending on what you need within the given situation. For example, we just spoke about Dark Panther can negate a monster's effect. You have another one that can destroy spell and trap cards. You've got another one that can banish cards, another one that can send cards back to the deck. There are so many variety and versatility of based cards. There's one that actually boosts this card's attack up, and therefore there's plenty of opportunity depending on how many different cards you have in your graveyard. The more you have, the more options you have to play around with. Elemental Hero Flare Neos is a fire attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Neospatian Flare Scarab, and must be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. You do not use Polymerization. This card gains 400 attack for each spell or trap card on the field. During the end phase, shuffle this card into the extra deck. The original Flare Scarab gains pretty much the same in terms of 400 attack and for each spell and trap card on the field, but it's only your field that it applies with to get its boost. This applies to all spell and traps on the field. Unlikely to get all 10 on the field to get the maximum attack points, otherwise that could become a 6500 attack points. But even if you say get a couple of your own and a couple of your opponents, that will make this over a 4000 attack monster, which is quite good. It's helped as, since it is effective by both yours and your opponent's spell and trap cards, the more you can just kind of set things up, the more powerful this card can become. It does only remain on the field until the end of the turn, but we have dedicated cards to prevent that downside of its effect. Elemental Hero Glowneus is a light warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Neospatian Glowmoss to summon it. Must first be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. Once per turn during the end phase, return this card to the extra deck. Once per turn during the main phase, you can target one face-up card your opponent controls. Destroy that target, and if you do, apply this effect based on its type. If it's a monster, this card cannot attack this turn. If it's a spell, this card can attack directly this turn. And if it's a trap, change this card to defense position. This is an upgrade to the effect of the original Glowmoss, as Glowmoss just flips the top card of your opponent's deck, and then depending on it gets an effect based on that. This card has the ability to just destroy a face-up card. I wish it had been able to destroy any particular card, whether it be face-up or face-down. That would have made it much better. You are quite restricted to its ability. If it happens to destroy a monster, this card can't attack for the rest of the turn, which is quite frustrating. If it's a spell, this card can attack directly, and since it has 2500 attack points, if this was combined with Neospace, that has 3000 attack points, that's a decent amount of damage, and if it's a trap card, this card is changed to defense position. In simpler terms, if you choose either the monster or the trap card, this card isn't going to be able to attack for the rest of the turn. There is the downside of using its abilities. If it's a spell, congratulations, you get the bonus of being able to inflict quite a bit of damage to the opponent. I think you need an upgrade of this to consider it to be any form of relevant. It was actually used within the anime multiple times. I believe it was used kind of in the duel against Sartorius, and that was Jane vs Sartorius near the final duel. Elemental Hero Grandneos is an Earth Attribute Warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Neospatian Grandmal. Must be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. Once per turn, you can target one monster your opponent controls, return that target to the hand. Once per turn during the end phase, return this card to the extra deck. This is similar to the Grandmal that was used to summon it, but with Grandmal it has to actually attack into your opponent's monster to trigger off its effect. This card can just simply target a monster your opponent controls and return that target to the hand. It's very useful against certain extra deck monsters, as those cards often can't be recovered easily and need more to bring them back onto the field. It has the negative impact of going back to the extra deck, but you've got many different cards that can support keeping this card on the field. Elemental Hero Honest Neos is a light attribute warrior type level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. The effect is, as a quick effect, you can discard this card, then target one hero monster on the field. It gains 2500 attack until the end of this turn. As a quick effect, you can discard one hero monster. This card gains attack equal to the discarded monster's attack until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect of Elemental Hero Honest Neos once per turn. This is meant to be a combination of the effects of Honest, basically in a Neos card. It creates the effect of Honest within the Elemental Hero deck. Just by discarding this card, you can take a hero monster you have on the field. It just boosts itself by 2500 attack points. Often this is enough to get over your opponent's monsters. Even the weakest monsters that you have that are Elemental Heroes, for example, I think Nospi has like 600 attack points, and I think Ice Edge has similar kind of attack points. Bobman has 800. Those will become guaranteed at least 3,100, 3,300 attack points, and therefore will often get over your opponent's monsters. The alternative is for you to discard a hero monster whilst this card is on the field, and this card gains attack equal to the discarded amount. That's quite similar, as this already starts at a high baseline of 2,500 attack points. Simply by discarding like a Sparkman would make this a 4,100 attack monster. Second part of the ability is rarely ever seen. I mean, I've never actually seen its effect being used with it. Yugioh. It's typically always the first ability that works at all. Elemental Hero Magma Neos is a fire attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 9 with 3,000 attack and 2,500 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos, a Neospatian Flare Scarab, and a Neospatian Grand Mole to summon it, and must first be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. You do not use polymerization. This card gains 400 attack for each card on the field. Once per turn during the end phase, shuffle this card into the extra deck. If this card is shuffled into the extra deck this way, return all cards on the field to the hand. This card was used in the duel between Viper and Jaden, as he was trying to stop him from taking the energy from students with these bioban systems. This was used to counteract his Venom deck, which had the Venamanaga, the deity of snakes, on the field. It had already been able to use its effect, and by bringing this card out, he was able to defeat the opponent. Now, this is an upgrade to the original Flare Neos, as whereas that card is dependent on 400 attack point boost from any spell or trap card on the field. This becomes better because it's 400 attack points for each card on the field. It's monsters, spell, and trap cards, and it applies to you and your opponent. The more cards you can even if you can't control the cards your opponent has on their field, you can control the cards that you have on your field. You bring out more cards, this card will easily become over a 4,000 attack monster, and will be able to get over most cards your opponent has. If this card happens to be returned to the extra, you can return all cards on the field to the hand. This copies and mimics the positive effects of the Grand Mole types of abilities and Grand Neos effect. There's a dispute, it's better to keep this card onto the field. Other times it's actually better for this just to return to the extra deck to trigger off that additional ability. Elemental Hero Marine Neos is a water attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's level 8 with 2,800 attack and 2,300 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos, Neospatian and Marine Dolphin. It must first be special summoned from your deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. You do not use polymerization. Once per turn, you can destroy one random card in your opponent's hand. This is similar to the original Neospatian Aqua Dolphin's effect and the Aqua Neos ability. The difference is that this requires Neospatian Marine Dolphin, which is an upgrade to the original Neospatian Aqua Dolphin, but it comes at more of a cost in that you have to use the next spell card to upgrade that monster into it. There's more heavy investment, you need at least another 2 cards to bring it out. This is just able to randomly, each and every turn, take a random card in your opponent's hand and just get rid of it. Benefit of this card is, unlike the Aquaneos, which requires you to discard, this card doesn't have any downsides. It doesn't require that as a cost. The other thing is, this is one of the only Neos-based fusion monsters that doesn't have inbuilt into its effect the ability to be sent back to the extra deck. Elemental Hero Nebula Neos is a warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 9 with 3000 to 2500 defense. It requires a Elemental Hero Neos, a Neospatian Grand Mole, and a Neospatian Dark Panther to summon it. And it must first be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling the cards you control to the deck. You do not use polymerization. If this card is special summoned from the extra deck, draw cards equal to the number of cards your opponent controls, then negate the effects of one face-up card on the field until the end of this turn. Once per turn during the end phase, shuffle this card into the extra deck, and if you do, banish all cards on the field face down. This is one of the newest forms of support that the Elemental Heroes and the Neospatians got in terms of any additional support. It requires Neos, a Grand Mole, and a Dark Panther to summon it, and it's quite an unusual kind of combination, as you already have the Chaos Neos, which uses both the Dark Panther and the Glow Neos. Typically, you haven't seen any double combinations with monsters that are already kind of synergized with each other. I think Dark Panther, Dark and Light are considered opposites, and that's why those two are often paired with each other. When this card is just special summoned from the extra deck, you get to draw cards equal to the number of cards your opponent controls. The more cards they have on the field, the more cards you get to draw. That just adds to your advantage. You're then able to negate the effects of one face-up card on the field until the end of this turn. It's not just monster effects. You can go for spell and trap cards, provided that's face-up on the field. That includes field spells. And that copies the kind of Dark Panther, Dark Neos effect. And during the end phase, by shuffling this card into the extra deck, you just banish all cards on the field face down. This includes your own cards. You don't want to be having too many of your own cards already on the field, unless you plan to keep this card out. It doesn't really maintain any of the effects of Grand Mole, as it doesn't have any return-based effects. Instead, it opts to banish cards to make it more difficult for your opponent to search for those cards and recover them. Elemental Hero Neos is a light attribute warrior type normal monster. It's a level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. A new Elemental Hero has arrived from Neospace. When he initiates a contact fusion with a Neospatian, his unknown powers are unleashed. This is the base card that all of the other Neos cards are based around, and therefore it's important for this card to be used within the deck. It is kind of used very heavily and was become the boss monster for Jane Yuki, as they all have that 2500 requirement on them, the same as with Yugioh Sakaki's Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. You've got Dark Magician for Yugimoto, you have Stardust Dragon for Yusei Fudo, and you've got the other examples. Yuma Tsukumo has his number 39 Utopia. Elemental Hero Neos Alias is a light attribute warrior type Gemini effect monster with a level 4 and 1900 attack and 1300 defense. This card is treated as a normal monster while face up on the field or in the graveyard. While this card is a normal monster on the field, you can summon it to have it become an effect monster with this effect. This card's name becomes Elemental Hero Neos while on the field. It's quite bizarre that you've got a Gemini version of an Elemental Hero Neos card. I understand that you want a version that isn't going to be overly powerful and doesn't outcompete the original Neos itself, but you need to double summon this card twice over to get the ability just to name itself Elemental Hero Neos. It's not advisable to run unless you've got there's a Gemini spell card that lets you just instantly treat the monster as though it's got its effect. If you could run that in the deck, then maybe that's advisable, but I'd rather have ways of recovering and searching for your original Elemental Hero Neos than ever really touching this card. Elemental Hero Neos Kluger is a light attribute spellcaster type fusion effect monster. It's a level 9 with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Yubel. It must be fusion, and before damage calculation, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to that opponent's monster's attack. If this face-up card is destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect, while its owner controls it, you can special one Neos Wiseman from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. You can only use this effect of Elemental Hero Neos Kluger once per turn. The on this card isn't too difficult, as Elemental Hero Neos, you can search for that card and Yubel can be searched out pretty simply as well. It's combining the two different aspects of Yuki with the Neos and Yubel. When this card battles an opponent's monster, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's attack point. That's quite decent. It's consistent burn damage to the opponent. And if this card happens to be destroyed either by battle or by an opponent's card by any means, you're just able to instantly special summon a Neos Wiseman, and that's just ignoring its summoning conditions. Typically that requires you to meet a condition that needs Yubel on the field as well. Elemental Hero Neos Knight is a light attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 7 with 2500 attack and 1000 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos monster and a warrior monster. It must be fusion summoned. It gains attack equal to half the original attack of the warrior fusion monster used for its fusion summon, except Elemental Hero Neos. It can make a second attack during each battle phase. Your opponent takes no battle damage from attacks involving this card. Summoning on this card is pretty simple, as it just needs a Neos and a warrior monster. Jane Yuki uses pretty much mostly warrior monsters. There's a couple of those cards that are outside of that, but they're kind of the exception rather than the rule. This card gains attack equal to half the original attack of the warrior fusion material used for its fusion summon. The more powerful the fusion material you have for it, the more powerful this card can become. This can make a second attack during each battle phase. It can wipe out a couple of monsters on the turn, but bear in mind that your opponent isn't going to take any battle damage from attacks involving this card. There is a downside to having this card. It's more just a way of clearing your opponent's field in order for your other monsters to then attack directly. Elemental Hero Shining Neos Wingman is a light attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 8 with 3100 attack and 2500 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos plus 1 fusion monster. It must be fusion summoned and gains 300 attack for each monster in your graveyard. It cannot be destroyed by card effects. If this card is special summoned, you can destroy cards your opponent controls up to the number of different attributes among the monsters on the field. You can only use this effect of Elemental Hero Shining Neos Wing once per turn. If this card destroys a monster by battle, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack. The summoning condition on this card isn't too bad. It just needs an Elemental Hero Neos and a Flame Ring and fusion monster. There are a couple of versions of that card, and there are spell cards that can treat your monsters as that Flame Wingman. Therefore, you don't even really require the original monster to bring it out. Even if you do have to use that, there are other ways of getting those cards out more quickly. This card gains 300 attack for each monster in your graveyard. That's actually better than the Elemental Hero Shining Wingman, because with Shining Flare Wingman, it only gets 300 attack points for each Elemental Hero monster you have in your graveyard. Therefore, you could technically run this with other cards in your deck, as well as other heroes, and still gain these additional attack points. This is unable to be destroyed by card effects. I liken that a bit to like how Elemental Hero Phoenix Enforcer prevents itself from being destroyed by battle. This is the alternative effect. This actually prevents it from being destroyed by card effects. I mean, being destroyed by battle isn't really an issue for this, as well as it will most likely have more than 4,000 attack points. It's quite difficult to get over with any of your fair monsters. When this card is special summoned, it doesn't have to just be by fusion, but actually even from being revived from the graveyard. You're able to just destroy cards your opponent controls up to the number of different attributes among monsters on the field. Since the Elemental Heroes run various monsters of pretty much every attribute, you can wipe out multiple monsters, multiple cards on the opponent's field. And there is a way of actually triggering and bringing this card out during your turn, during your opponent's turn, and wiping out their cards before they can actually do much of anything. When this card destroys a monster by battle, you can inflict damage to the opponent equal to that monster's original attack. That's pretty much the same type of effect as Elemental Hero Flare Wingman. It just takes that same ability. but it's better because I think that's actually a good way. The more powerful this card is, the more damage you're going to get from both the initial attack, the battle damage, and the effect damage. Elemental Hero Spirit of Neos is a light attribute warrior type level 7 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can special this card from your hand in defense position, and if you do, it cannot be destroyed by battle. If this card is special, you can add from your deck to your hand 1 polarization, or 1 spell or trap card that mentions an Elemental Hero monster's card name. During your main phase, you can shuffle this card into the deck, and if you do, special summon 1 Elemental Hero normal monster from your deck. You can only use each effect of Elemental Hero Spirit of Neos once per turn. The initial effect of this card lets you protect one of your monsters. That's useful as it's a way of protecting the weaker monsters you have on the field, and this just gets special summoned in defense position. Once this card is special summoned, you can do by its effect. You're able to search for a polarization or a spell or trap that has an Elemental Hero monster's card name within it. There are many variety of cards you can actually go for, making it really easy to apply for. And during the main phase, just by shuffling this card back into the deck, you can replace it with an Elemental Hero normal monster. Most of the time you are going to be targeting your Elemental Hero Neos to bring out. You can actually go into your contact fusions, or you could actually technically bring out one of the other normal monsters, say Sparkman if you want to go into Elemental Hero Thunder Giant if you're bidding for going into any of the classic kind of fusion monsters. Elemental Hero Storm Neos is a Wind Warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 9 with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. It requires an Elemental Hero Neos and a Neospatian Hummingbird and a Neospatian Aquadolphin. It must first be special summoned from your X deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. Once per turn, you can destroy all spell and trap cards on the field, and once per turn during the end phase, return this card to the X deck. If this card is returned into the X deck this way, shuffle all cards onto the field into the deck. This is another example of those kind of double contact fusions that happens where you need 2 Neospatians alongside Neos. Therefore, it does require a lot of... It does have the ability to heavy storm the field. That's all spell and trap cards. Provided you don't have any on your field, it's going to wipe out your opponents. But you just have to be aware of as when you use this type of ability. When it is returned to the extra deck by its effect, all cards on the field are shuffled into the deck. You're not going to want to have anything on your field as to not gain the negative effects of this ability. It means you're going to have to be running cards that can kind of activate in your hand to protect your life points, such as Battle Fader, or even there's a couple of the Ghost Trick cards which are useful when you don't have anything in the field to protect your life points. This card was actually used within the duel between Jane Yuki and Yugioh. It was the kind of final duel, and unlike most of the other double fusions of these Neos cards, this card doesn't take any of the effects of either Hummingbird or Aquadolphin within its own ability. Air Hummingbird recovers your life points. Aquadolphin discards cards from your opponent's hand. This just completely is one of the only examples of ones that just completely ignore anything any of its base forms actually does. Neo's Space Connector is a light warrior type level 4 with 800 attack and 1800 defense. When this card is normal summoned, you can special summon 1 Neospatian monster or 1 Elemental Hero Neos from your hand or deck in defense position. You can tribute this card, then target 1 Neospatian monster or 1 Elemental Hero Neos in your graveyard, special summon it in defense position. You can only use each effect of Neospatian Space Connector once per turn. When this card is normal summoned, you're just able to bring out a Neospatian monster or a Elemental Hero Neos straight from the hand or deck in defense position, making it really easy to just go into your Neospatian fusion monsters. By attributing this card, you can take a Neospatian or an Elemental Hero Neos in your graveyard and just immediately special that card, making it very easy to just, as it says, it's Neo Space Connector, it connects the two parts of the deck very well and synergizes to help bring out your monsters without having to run any other kind of weird search cards. Neo Space Pathfinder is a light attribute warrior type level 4 with 1800 attack and 800 defense. You can discard this card to the graveyard to add one Neospace from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Like a lot of decks now, they've received their own version of a field spell search card. There are examples, for example, with I think the Dark Lords have one, there's another one for Archfiends, there's another one for Elemental Heroes, so you've got that one, you've got one for Evil Heroes. There are many different recovery cards that this is just kind of part of the norm. It does look like another version of Elemental Hero Neos, maybe a weaker one, and it's really just there to add to consistency of getting your Neospace back to your hand. It's nice that it not only searches from your deck, but it actually recovers from your graveyard. It has that double utility. Neospatian Air Hummingbird is a wind attribute winged beast level 3 with 800 attack and 600 defense. Once per turn, you can gain 500 life points for each card in your hand. This was first used in the second duel that Jaden had against Aster Phoenix. In that duel, he used this, and its ability was referred to as Honeysuck. It gives you life points 500 times the number of cards in your opponent's hand. It's a good way of recovering your life points, and there aren't any other consistent ways of doing that within the deck. Neospatian Aquadolphin is a water attribute warrior type level 3 with 600 attack and 800 defense. Once per turn, you can discard one card, look at your opponent's hand, and choose one monster. If you control a monster with attack greater than or equal to the attack of the chosen card, destroy the chosen card, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. Otherwise, you take 500 damage. The design on this card means that you really need a monster on your field in order to guarantee you're wiping out your opponent's cards. It does require a discard, and though you do get to choose a monster in your opponent's hand, it varies depending on how kind of strong their monsters are and the archetype that you're facing. Provided you have a stronger monster than that monster that was chosen, that card gets ripped out of your opponent's hand and they take 500 points of damage. If that doesn't work, then you've not only lost the discard cost on this effect, but you take the 500 points of damage. Neospatian Dark Panther is a dark attribute beast type level 3 with 1000 attack and 500 defense. Once per turn, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls. Until the end phase, this card's name becomes that monster's original name. Replace this effect with that monster's original effects, if any. This card has the ability to just copy an opponent's name and take that monster's effect, depending on what their effect is. Replicating that ability will provide you with more advantage than actually taking the name. It was used first against the duel between, it was a double duel with Aster and Jane versus Serena, who was sister, and it was used to copy the Dark Creator. The purpose of that was that it could use the field spell card, which was that mirror card, to bring out all these different tokens and then destroy the original Dark Creator. Neospatian Flare Scarab is a fire attribute insect type level 3 with 500 attack and 500 defense. The effect is to gain 400 attack for each spell or trap card your opponent controls. This is not as good as if you were to be able to kind of work on your field, as you can't always guarantee what your opponent's going to run. I remember it was used in the duel between Jaden and Axel Brody, and because he used all these accelerator cards and he was constantly playing cards face down and setting and putting other cards in the spell and trap, this was a way of getting this card's attack up. Most likely you're going to get hit maybe a couple of cards. This will become a 1300 attack monster. If you're lucky, you might get it to 1700, but that's very unlikely. Neospatian Glowmoss is a light attribute plant type level 3 with 300 attack and 900 defense. If this card attacks or is attacked, your opponent draws a card and shows it. Then, based on its type, apply this effect. If it's a monster attack, it ends the battle phase of this turn. If it's a spell, if this card is attacking, you can change it to a direct attack instead. Or if this is a trap card, change this card to defense position. This is not necessarily a good card because whether this card attacks or is attacked, it allows your opponent to draw a card, and anytime you give your opponent a draw, it's never a good sign. And then even if you were to get the best side of this card's effect, which is a direct attack, that's only 300 life points your opponent sustains. If it's either the monster or the trap effect, this card really just doesn't attack for the rest of the turn. And since it ends the battle phase, if it's your opponent attacking into this and it ends their battle phase, that's fine, that's actually perfect. But if you're ending your own battle phase before you can actually do anything, that's the disadvantage. Neospacian Grand Mole is an Earth attribute rock type level 3 with 900 attack and 300 defense. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can return both the opponent's monster and this card to the hand. And this can be quite useful depending on how many other cards you have currently on your field, as if you can continue just keep bringing this card out and your opponent can't especially to do anything on their field, then those monsters that just keep going back to the hand, being reset, and then your opponent will eventually have too many in their hand and not enough on the field. They'll end up having to discard things, and then they'll be in a position where they're just continually losing field presence. Neospacian Marine Dolphin is a water attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 4 with 900 attack and 1100 defense. This card's name is treated as Neospacian Aqua Dolphin. This card cannot be special summoned except with nets. Once per turn, you can discard one card to look at your opponent's hand and select one monster in it. If you control a monster with attack greater than or equal to the selected monsters, destroy the selected monster and inflict 500 damage to your opponent. This is a slightly more powerful version than the original Aqua Dolphin, but it has to be brought out by the effect of Next, which means you have to use both the Aqua Dolphin and the spell card Next to bring this card out. This still requires a discard to look at your opponent's hand and to choose a monster within it. It's pretty much a mirror of the effect of Aqua Dolphin. Provided you have a monster that has attack greater or equal, that monster is destroyed and your opponent takes 500 points of damage. The only other side of this is you don't have the disadvantage of the negative effect for Aqua Dolphin, which would require you to take 500 points of damage. Neospacian Twinkle Moss is a light attribute plant type fusion effect monster. It's a level 4 with 500 attack and 1100 defense. This card's name is treated as Neospacian Glow Moss. This card cannot be special summoned except with nets. When this card attacks or is attacked, draw one card. Reveal that card and based on its type, apply the proper effect. Monster, end the battle. Spell, you can change this card's attack to a direct attack, and trap, this monster is changed to defense position. This is an upgrade of the original Glow Moss. Similar to that Marine Dolphin, it does get a slightly better effect in that instead of your opponent drawing cards, it's when you have this monster attacked or attacks, you get to draw a card, and either if it's a monster, it just ends the battle phase. If this is your opponent attacking into this, that's a good thing. If you're attacking into them, that's a bad thing. If it's a spell, this card makes it a direct attack, which isn't much, it's only 500 points of damage. And if this is its trap, then this monster is changed to defense position, which means it can't attack for the rest of that turn. Neos Wiseman is a light attribute spellcaster type level 10 with 3000 attack and 3000 defense. It cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned from your hand by sending one face-up Elemental Hero Neos and one face-up Yugioh you control to the graveyard. It cannot be destroyed by card effects. At the end of the damage step, if this card battled an opponent's monster, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that opponent's monster's attack. Also, you gain life points equal to that opponent's monster's defense. The summoning condition on this card is a little bit annoying, as you need both the Neos and the Yugioh on your field, and they have to be in your field to the graveyard. Both of those require 2 tributes to bring them out, unless you've got other cheat cards to bring those out. It cannot be destroyed by card effects, which is quite decent, but there are so many cards that can actually get around this. Even things like Compulsive Evacuation Device can remove this card without ever being a destruction-based effect. But this has, on the plus side, decent attack points, and at 3000, it can burn your opponent for the opponent's attack points, and it boosts your life points equal to that opponent's monster's defense points. Not only are you increasing the difference between yours and your opponent's life points to a point which can give you a kind of safety net. Rainbow Neos is a light attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 10 with 4500 attack and 3000 defense. It requires an elemental hero Neos and an ultimate crystal monster. It must be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials. Once per turn, you can activate one of these effects. Either send one monster you control to the graveyard, shuffle all monsters your opponent controls into the deck, Send one spell or trap card you control to the graveyard, shuffle all spell and traps your opponent controls into the deck, or send one card from the top of your deck to the graveyard, shuffle all cards from your opponent's graveyard into the deck. In the past, effect came into play. This card was an elemental hero Neos plus a rainbow dragon. Now, since there are various forms of rainbow dragon, they're just classed under this ultimate crystal kind of archetype of the deck, and just any of those cards would actually apply as the fusion material. This card was used in the duel between Yugioh and Jaden, and it was kind of used to finalize things. But it's a combination of Neos and the Rainbow Dragon, which is supposed to be kind of bonding the two decks together. This has quite a few abilities to it. By sending a monster you control to the graveyard, just shuffling all monsters your opponent controls into the deck means that they're not able to trigger off any effects. It helps to disrupt your opponent from recovering those cards. By sending a spell or trap you control to the graveyard, you're just shuffling the spell and traps back into the deck, which can be useful for disrupting them if they've got a very heavy spell and trap presence. But bear in mind, this doesn't actually stop them from activating any of the effects in response to that. They could get rid of this as part of the effect before this effect gets to apply. And the third ability, just by sending a card from the top of your deck to the graveyard, you shuffle all cards from your opponent's graveyard into the deck. This is very useful if your opponent is trying to set up a certain type of play, which is heavily reliant on their graveyard setup. Engage Neospace is a normal spell card. A Neospatian monster and one elemental hero monster, one from your hand and one from your deck, to the graveyard. Special summon one Neospatian monster or one level 5 or higher elemental hero monster from your deck, and if you do, add one polarization from your deck or graveyard to your hand. If you special the elemental hero Neos by this effect, it gains 1000 attack points. You cannot special monsters from the edge deck except fusion monsters the turn you activate this card. You can only activate one Engage Neospace per turn. The artwork is very much designed on a duel between... This was the first time that Yugioh ended up being in the Neospace, kind of first introducing it to his Neospatians, and he had to face off against the Light's kind of robot creature. It had this monster called Candelato, which is that kind of red-looking dragon being. It basically gains 1000 attack points for each card that you have in your hand, and its other effect is that you cannot draw whilst this card is on the field. I think that's the other ability. And as you can see, this is kind of a clash between Candelato and the elemental hero Neos. Just by sending a Neospatian and an elemental hero monster, just one from the hand, one from the deck, to the graveyard, you can just bring out either a Neospatian or a high level elemental hero monster. It doesn't have to be Neos, it can be. It could be Blade Edge, it could be Necroshade, any of those that are level 5 or higher from the deck. It helps to actually add for consistency of bringing out your other elemental hero fusion monsters, as it brings out a polymerization. You are rewarded more if you do bring out an elemental hero Neos by this effect, as that monster gains 1000 attack points. It becomes a 3500 attack monster. You are locked into fusion monsters for the rest of the turn, but that isn't a downside, as most of the elemental hero monsters are actual fusion monsters. You have a couple of link monsters, but outside of that, that's fine. Instant Neospace is an equipped spell card. Its effect is equip only to a fusion monster that lists elemental hero Neos as a material. It does not have to activate its effect during the end phase to shuffle itself into the extra deck. If the equipped monster leaves the field, you can special summon one elemental hero Neos from your hand, deck, or graveyard. This card's effect is basically Neospace, but in the form of an equipped spell rather than a field spell. This prevents the negative downside abilities of your elemental hero Neos fusion monsters, as well as if the equipped monster happens to leave the field, you can just replace it with an elemental hero Neos, whether that be from the hand, the deck, or the graveyard. Next is a normal spell card. The effect is to send one face-up Neospatian monster you control to the graveyard. Special summon one level 4 monster with the same name from your deck. This is used either to bring out the Neospatian Marine Dolphin by using Aqua Dolphin as the material, or use Glow Moss to bring out the Twinkle Moss. Currently, those are the only two examples within the deck that you can use. It's a shame that you haven't got them for the other Neospatians, But I suppose since those cards aren't even used themselves, I'd question why you'd even bother. Here's another question for you. We have received the Elemental Hero Marine Dolphin, which is the upgraded version of Aqua Dolphin. But we did not get like a Twinkle Moss Elemental Hero fusion, whereas we got a Gloam. I'm wondering whether there'd be room to bring like that into play. But again, I don't think that's on Konami's radar. I don't think they'd consider looking into for the time being. Next is a normal trap card. The effect is to special summon as any number of monsters with different names from your hand and or graveyard in defense position that are Neospatian monsters or Elemental Hero Neos, but negate their effects. And as long as you control any of those special summon monsters face up, you cannot special summon them from the extra deck except fusion monsters. You can only activate one next per turn. If you control no cards, you can activate this card from your hand. The design on this card is it's just able to special summon any number of monsters with different names from hand or graveyard that are either all Neospatians or Elemental Hero Neos. It makes it much easier to go into the higher, more advanced versions of the Elemental Hero Neos fusion monsters. So long as you control any of those, you're locked into fusion monsters from the extra deck. That's fine. That's just the design of how their deck works. But you have the benefit if you just don't have any cards on your field, if you can just activate this straight from the hand. Neospace is a field spell card. The effect is to Elemental Hero Neos and all fusion monsters that mention Elemental Hero Neos as fusion material gain 500 attack. Elemental Hero Neos as fusion material do not have to activate their effects during the end phase that shuffle them into the extra deck. This card is helping not only to prevent your fusion monsters from being returned to the extra deck. They can be if you want to. It's an optional ability, which is quite rare. Usually you're kind of forced into doing, but it provides just the general field spell type of ability to boost their attack points by 500. Lots of, field spells boost between 3 to 500 as kind of a standard. One of the examples that isn't is the Snake Eyes Ash, kind of that archetype, because most of the monsters they have are weak. That's an example of one that boosts by 1100 attack. There's another one which is Wetlands, which boosts low-level aqua monsters by 1200 attack points. Neos Force is an equipped spell card. The effect is to equip only to Elemental Hero Neos. It gains 800 attack points. When it destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the original attack of the destroyed monster in the graveyard. During the end phase, shuffle this card into the deck. This card is pretty much the effect of Elemental Hero Flame Wingman, just in an equip spell. It boosts your Elemental Hero Neos to 3300 attack, which is fine, and it just grants that Flame Wingman ability. It's a shame during the end phase that it shuffles itself back into the deck. I don't think it's warranted doing this, as it really doesn't do anything significant, and it's easy to destroy. Neos Fusion is a normal spell card. Special summon one fusion monster from your extra deck that lists exactly 2 monsters as material, including Elemental Hero Neos, by sending those monsters from your hand, deck, or field, ignoring its conditions. For the rest of this turn after this card, you cannot special monsters. If a fusion monster you control that lists Elemental Hero Neos as material would be destroyed by battle, or card effect, or shuffled into the extra deck by its own effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. This is an easy way of bringing out your various fusion Elemental Hero Neos cards, but notice that it has to be exactly 2 monsters as materials. It can only go into the base forms of these fusion monsters. It can't go into the advanced forms that need 2 or more. And it has to use the exact monsters from either the hand, the deck, or the field. That's actually quite useful because you're going to be targeting mostly from the deck. It's not, using up as you have either in the hand or on the field. And it completely ignores the summon condition. That's always a good thing. This card does knock you away from using any further special in the turn. You need to be aware of that. But if a fusion monster you control that lists Elemental Hero Neos as material would be destroyed by battle or card effect, or if it be shuffled back into the deck by its own effect, you can just banish this card instead to kind of sub out the negative effect. Reverse of Neos is a quick play spell card. The effect is activate only when a face-up Neos fusion monster you control is destroyed. Special summon one elemental hero Neos from your deck in attack position. It gains 1000 attack and is destroyed during the end phase of this turn. The idea of this is really more to protect your life points, as, you know, when your Neos fusion monster is typically destroyed, you might not have any other cards on the field. It does bring your hero Neos from the deck in attack position. It becomes 3,500 attack points, and your opponent is going to find it quite tricky to get over that monster easily. Even though Neos goes and gets destroyed during the end phase of that turn, it protects you for that turn, and you could possibly recover it to use it for another fusion summon the next turn. Wrath of Neos is a normal spell card. Its effect is to target one elemental hero Neos in your monster zone, shuffle that elemental hero Neos into the deck, and if you do, destroy all cards on the field. The premise on this is that it just wipes out all cards on the field. It includes yours. You need to be aware of when you activate this effect that you could be losing things as well. It's typically quite good, as it means you're wiping out a lot of your opponent's cards, but if they've got effects that react to being destroyed, then actually that works against you. You need to be aware about the type of decks that your opponent is playing and the style of archetypes they run. Contact Out is a quick play spell card. Its ability is to return one Neos fusion monster you control to the extra deck. If all the fusion material monsters listed on that fusion monster are in your deck, you can special them. This card, I think, was seen in the duel between Axel and Jane Yuki, as I think Axel was using his Blaze Accelerator effect to try and destroy his monster, and then he split it apart, his flares, I think it was Flare Neos, back into Elemental Hero Neos and Neospatian Flare Scarab, that, you know, he had to use multiple times of the Blaze Accelerator to then destroy those monsters. Honest is a light attribute fairy type level 4 with 1100 attack and 1900 defense. Now, I know what you're thinking, why am I mentioning Honest in this? But since it has relevance, and since it has connection to the archetype itself, and since it has its own version, I thought it was a good idea to cover this card. During your main phase, you can return this face-up card from the field to the hand. During the damage step, when a light monster you control battles as a quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. That monster gains attack equal to the attack of the opponent's monster it is battling until the end of this turn. It has a double kind of effect. You can actually have this card on the field and then go into attacks with it, but also you can send it back to the hand and then hopefully trigger off its effect. The idea is that your monster, your light monster that's always being attacked, will always have attack points more than your opponent's, and it's very difficult for your opponent to respond outside of hopefully trying to get this card out the hand through discard ability. There are a few light attribute monsters that work within the Elemental Hero deck. You've got Sparkman, you've got Prisma, you've got Shining Flare Wingman, Elemental Hero Neos. There are applications that this card could be introduced into the deck. Rainbow Dart Dragon is a Dart attribute dragon type level 10 with 4000 attack and 0 defense. This card is always treated as an ultimate crystal card. It cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned from your hand by banishing 7 dart monsters with different names from your graveyard. You can banish all other dart monsters from your field and graveyard. This card gains 500 attack for each card banished this way. This card was used when Jesse was, I think it was possessed by Yugioh, and in that premise they kind of made this dark version of Rainbow Dragon. Since it's classified as an ultimate crystal card, that's why it works alongside the Rainbow Neos part of the deck. This card is quite tricky to summon, as it needs to banish 7 dark monsters, and they all have to have different names from your graveyard. That in itself is quite tricky, but you can banish all other dark monsters from the field and graveyard, and this card gains 500 attack for each card banished this way. This is a permanent increase. You can make it a very powerful card, and I think this effect can continually be used. That's not a problem for it. The issue comes down to how many times are you going to be able to do that? Can you actually recover those cards that you banished from your graveyard back to the graveyard and then trigger off this card's effect again to ensure it's constantly boosted with its attack points? It's reliably a little bit stronger technically than the Rainbow Dragon itself, as it could get over that 10,000 baseline for most Rainbow Dragon monsters. Rainbow Dragon is a light dragon type level 10 with 4000 attack and 0 defense. This card is always treated as an ultimate crystal card. It cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special from your hand by having 7 crystal cards, beast cards, with different names on your field and or graveyard. This card cannot activate the following effects the turn it is special. As a quick effect, you can send all crystal beast monsters you control to the graveyard. This card gains 1000 attack for each monster sent to the graveyard. You can banish all crystal beast monsters from your graveyard to shuffle all cards on the field into the deck. This card is quite tricky to bring out, although there are more recent support cards for the crystal beast monsters to make it easier to bring them out. You only have the original 7 monsters, and you need at least 1 of each in order to bring this to the field. This is not able to use its effect on the turn it is special summoned. There's a weakness for it, as it's a delayed effect, even though it is a level 10 with 4000 attack points. The quick effect just lets you send all crystal beast monsters you control to the graveyard, and this card gains 1000 attack points for each monster sent to the graveyard. Potentially you can get this over 10,000 attack points, but it does require an all or nothing approach. You have to get rid of everything in order to get this to a decent level of attack to hopefully OTK your opponent. Alternatively, just by banishing all crystal beast monsters from your graveyard, you just shuffle all cards on the field into the deck. This helps to disrupt, if your opponent has lots of cards on the field and you have barely anything, maybe you just have this card out. It's a way of disrupting their rhythm. Yugioh is a Dark Attribute Fiend type level 10 with 0 attack and defense. It cannot be destroyed by battle. You take no damage from battles involving this card. Before damage calculation, if this face attack position card is targeted for an attack, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that attacking monster's attack. Once per turn during a phase, tribute 1 other monster, or destroy this card. When this card is destroyed, except by its own effect, its owner can special summon 1 Yugioh Terror Incarnate from their hand, deck, or graveyard. Since Yugioh is part of Jaden's archetype and has been used in a couple of his cards, this is why we're discussing this one. It has had more recent support, but that's specifically for Yugioh, and that won't be discussed in this video. Cannot be destroyed by battle, that's perfect. Really easy. It'd be really bad if it could stay on the field and still be attacked into and you take damage, 0 out all damage. Before damage calculation, if this is targeted for an attack, you just instantly inflict damage to your opponent equal to that attacking monster's attack. Therefore, the higher their attack points, the more damage they take as recall damage. During the end phase, you have to tribute another monster or you have to destroy this card, but if you let this card just get destroyed by its own except by its own effect, that's the disadvantage of that. You're constantly having to cycle things or to destroy this by additional effects. Then you can bring out the upgraded version of itself either from the hand, deck, or graveyard. Battle of Sleeping Spirits is a quick play spell card. Each player can special 1 monster from their graveyard that was destroyed by battle this turn in attack position. And if you special Elemental Hero Neos by this effect, if it battles your opponent's monster this turn, its attack becomes doubled during the damage step only. You can only activate 1 Battle of Sleeping Spirits per turn. This card was actually used against the Dark World King, and in that duel he'd already used his Dark Corridor to bring out his highest level, his Rainbow back to the field. The problem with that is that when you use that effect of Dark Corridor, it's unable to let you re-summon monsters. When Jaden used this card to bring out his Elemental Hero Neos, he was able to just attack the Dark World King himself without him being able to revive that monster. It does have the ability to double the monster you have attack points. It does become 5,000 attack points. And it's a good way of inflicting and almost guaranteeing that you're going to get over your opponent's monster. Common is a continuous spell card. The effect is to select 1 face-up monster on the field, special summon 1 Neospatian monster from your hand to the same side of the field as the selected monster. The selected monster gains attack equal to the attack of the monster that was special summoned by this effect. When this card is removed from the field, return that special summon monster to its owner's hand. The premise on this card is that it's able to boost a monster on the field, whether that be yours or your opponent's, by the attack points of a Neospatian that you special to that field as same as that monster. Overall, when you think of the Neospatians, their attack points range from 300 for Glomos all the way up to, I think Dark Panther has 1,000, potentially an extra 1,000 points. It's fine, and I would more use this card to just special the Neospatian onto the field to hopefully then go into a contact fusion. Double Hero Attack is a quick play spell card. If you control a fusion monster that lists elemental hero Neos as material, target one hero fusion monster in your graveyard, special it, ignoring its summoning conditions. You can only activate one double hero attack per turn. This being a quick play spell card means it can be activated during yours or your opponent's turn. Provided you have a fusion monster that already has elemental hero Neos as its material, you can just bring out a hero fusion monster from your graveyard. It can be special summoned, ignoring its summoning conditions. You can bring out effectively anything. And since it's just hero monsters, it can be any of the hero monsters. And by doing this, you've got more powerful cards. It's more useful as you've gone longer within the duel, as you're going to have more likely those cards in the graveyard to rely upon this effect. Ian Wave is a continuous spell card. Your elemental hero monster is used as material for a fusion summon and sent to the graveyard or banished, except during a damage step. You can special one Neospatian monster or one elemental hero Neos from your deck. If a Neospatian monster or elemental hero Neos you control or is in your graveyard is shuffled into your deck or extra deck, except during a damage step, you can special summon one elemental hero monster from your graveyard. You can only use each effect of Ian Wave once per turn. This is a quite strange card. So long as your elemental hero monster is used as a material for a fusion card and sent to the graveyard or banished, you're just able to special Neospatian monster or an elemental hero monster from your deck. It does provide you with instant replacement for your fusion material, and if a Neospatian monster or elemental hero Neos you control or is in your graveyard is shuffled into the deck or extra deck through their own effects often, you're able to replace it with an elemental hero monster from your graveyard. This is a good way of replacing materials and cards that are lost through their own effects. Favourite Contact is a normal trap card. The effect is to special summon one fusion monster from your extra deck that mentions a hero monster as material, ignoring its conditions, by placing the fusion materials mentioned on it on the bottom of the deck in any order, from among cards in your field, hand or graveyard and or your banished cards. If you placed elemental hero Neos into the deck, neither player can return the monster special summoned by this effect to the extra deck. You can only activate one Favourite Contact per turn. This is a very useful card within all of the hero-based decks, as you are able to use the materials from your hand, your field, your graveyard, and your banished zones. Those cards return to the bottom of the deck, which isn't a problem. Many of the cards let you shuffle the deck in such a way as to be able to use those cards again quite quickly, and then you're able to just bring out a fusion monster ignoring the summoning conditions. You don't have to take into account any lackluster conditions. Bear in mind, if you placed an elemental hero Neos into the deck, the fusion monster you bring out with that cannot then be returned to the extra deck through its own ability. It helps to mitigate that disadvantage. Instant Contact is a normal spell card. Pay 1,000 life points to special one level 7 or lower elemental hero or Neospatian monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. While elemental hero Neos is neither on your field nor in your graveyard, the summon monster cannot attack, its effects are negated, it returns to the extra deck during the end phase. You can only activate one Instant Contact per turn. The 1,000 life points cost damage isn't too big of a deal. You're just able to bring out a level 7 or lower hero or a Neospatian from the extra deck, ignoring the summoning conditions. That's perfectly fine. You're able to bring out basically most of the original forms of the Neos, elemental hero Neos fusion monsters. While elemental hero Neos is neither on your field nor in your graveyard, the monster cannot attack. You need to have it present either in the hand or the graveyard. Its effects are negated and it returns the extra deck during the end phase. You're incentivized to have your elemental hero Neos with you to rely on this effect. As you can see, it's just the baseline forms of the elemental hero fusion monsters, which is fine as they have their own effects. Potentially you can extend that with other cards. Miracle Contact is a normal spell card. The effect is to shuffle into the deck from your hand, field, or graveyard the fusion materials that are mentioned on an Elemental Hero fusion monster that mentions Elemental Hero Neos as material. Then special that fusion monster from your X deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. This is able to respond to quite a lot of your kind of field zone. That could be the hand, the field, or the graveyard. The only one it doesn't really touch is the banish pile. And that can instantly recover those cards back into the deck. You can use those in the future and then bring out a hero fusion monster that has Elemental Hero Neos as material. This can be good as it's a way of bringing out your more specific monsters as well as ignoring the summoning conditions. You can bring out the strongest ones without too many considerations. Overfusion is a quick play spell card. Target one face-up monster on the field, reveal one Elemental Hero, Neospatian, or level 10 monster from your hand, deck, or extra deck, and that targeted monster's name can be treated as revealed monsters if used as fusion material this turn. Send the revealed monster to the graveyard if you have Elemental Hero Neos on your field or in your graveyard, otherwise shuffle it back into its deck. If revealed from the hand, shuffle it into the main deck. You can only activate one overfusion per turn. What this card does is it's able to treat itself as the name of another specific card. This is useful as a kind of fusion substitute and lets you go into your more advanced, more difficult to summon Elemental Hero Neos fusion monsters without tying yourself into many different types of cards. The example given shows the Rainbow Dragon as, you know, that's going to be a little bit tricky to kind of play, alongside it kind of presenting itself with the Elemental Hero Neo. If you could treat one of your cards as the Rainbow Dragon, you would be able to contact fuse using that card as Rainbow Dragon with your Elemental Hero Neos on the fuse, contact fuse that into your Rainbow Neos monster. It doesn't have too much of a downside of it because it just means you have to reveal an Elemental Hero, a Neospatian, or a level 10 monster, which Rainbow Dragon meets that requirement. It has to be from the hand, the deck, or the extra deck, and you just get to treat it by its name. You do have to send the revealed monster to the graveyard, and if you have a Hero Neos on your field or in your graveyard, otherwise it gets shuffled back into the deck if you don't have that particular monster on the field. This is a decent ability, and it's definitely that was useful within the deck and what it needed. Overall, when I look at the Elemental Heroes, the Neos fusions, and that kind of Neospatian side of the deck, I really love the designs, and I hope in the future they will consider making kind of upgrades or more variations on their fusion monsters, using a variety of different effects. As it is, I think we are still missing combinations as we are with the Twinkle Moss. I would like to see, you know, if you're going to incentivize people to start using that spell card called Nex, you need equivalent versions of these fusion cards for the other Neospatians, but you needed much higher upgraded versions of those effects. I'd like to see just more consistency within the deck playstyle and just more variety, a bit like how Elemental Heroes have many different fusion monsters that actually your opponent cannot kind of predict what you are going to do. As always, it'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel. It really helps to support it, and to like it to help share it to a wider audience. Thank you.